from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased. Joining me, Josh Dorfman. He's the CEO and host of Supercool. Josh, as I was telling you before we started the recording, the way I love to do it is I keep it to my guests to give us, the full story, the history. So tell me a little bit more, what you've been up to and what brought you to start the Supercool. So the floor is yours.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Mehmet. It's really great to have a chance to speak with you. So I have been a sustainability, climate-focused entrepreneur for over 20 years. The quick story on how that came about: in the early 90s, I was in China thinking about a career in State Department, maybe CIA. I just felt if I went to China, something cool would happen. Something cool did happen, but it was a little different. I ended up working for a company called Kryptonite Bike Locks at the time, the strongest bike lock in the world. Kryptonite, stronger than Superman. And I was working in factories thinking about a very exciting opportunity, 1 billion people in China riding bicycles at the time. Everybody had a bicycle. But over the course of a couple of years, you could start to see all the infrastructure coming in for bridges, tunnels, highways, all this automobile infrastructure. And probably at some point in my second year, I actually do remember the moment we were opening a factory in southern China, and I was partnering with traveling with the Chinese owner of the factory. The executives from Kryptonite had flown over from America. And we got to this parking lot. We were going to go into this restaurant and consummate the deal by toasting in snake blood and a little bit of what's called baijiu, basically like Chinese, like almost like grain alcohol. And that's how we were going to get the deal done. But before we went in, we were in the parking lot, and this Chinese businessman said to me, "Josh, look, my Mercedes is the biggest Mercedes here in this parking lot amongst all these Mercedes of all of these southern Chinese businessmen, people from Hong Kong who had businesses also in southern China." And in that moment, I thought, wow, I don't know anything about climate change or global warming, but there will be 1 billion cars in this country because, all the infrastructure I mentioned. And I thought, wow, these guys want exactly what we want: more, bigger, better, increased quality of life. And that was really a trigger for me to kind of the environmental epiphany, where eventually I came back to the States. I went and got my MBA, went through the .com boom and bust, around the year 2000, but eventually made my way to sustainability and climate because I couldn't dismiss what I'd seen in China. There's kind of a long journey from there to where I get to today, but essentially Supercool, the business I'm running today, is a media company focused on climate solutions that are real, proven, beyond the lab, beyond pilot stage, commercial, in market, scaling up, and really demonstrating that you can cut carbon, boost profits, increase quality of life, and really grow these wonderful businesses at the same time. So we covered those kinds of solutions. We also look at what cities are doing. We talk to mayors, but generally that's the scope. There's a new low carbon economy emerging. We like to cover it. We think it's underway, but underrepresented. And so we dive into that.
Great. And, thank you for sharing that story also, Josh, with me and the audience, I would say. So from, kind of media and also e-commerce kind of, right? So because you did a few things before I was researching, so you did something called the Lazy Environmentalists, right? So, and of course, with what you do today, so what's the common, thread across all these ventures that you did? And did that affect it? Because when we talk about environment and when we talk about sustainability, the first thing that comes to mind is impact, right? So, has, the definition of the word impact changed over the years, from when you started doing this until today with Supercool?
Well, It's certainly changed in the market of ideas or the marketplace of ideas, but it hasn't changed for me. What I came to realize in 2004, and so my journey, like many entrepreneurs and just simply many people, is not linear, hasn't been linear. I went into I got my MBA, like I mentioned, went through the .com thing, worked for a tech startup in LA. I then had a little stint writing screenplays. I then went into a PhD program in political science at George Washington University, thinking about politics, China, and the environment. Realized about a semester in that was a big mistake for the way my brain works. And then I started my first company, which was became a modern design sustainable furnishings and furniture company, really focused on the design piece, trying to sell into customers around, hey, this is beautiful, beautiful furniture, high quality, contemporary modern design. It happens to be sustainable. But that was really the key. And that's been the through line for me through everything I've done. You mentioned the Lazy Environmentalist, which I'm happy to talk about too. But the point of view that I've always strived for was identifying solutions, whether they're business to consumer or business to business, where the mindset is, would you want this even if you didn't care about the climate crisis? Even if you didn't believe climate change is real, would this solution still appeal to you?
Right. So when when we talk about anything related to climate technology, right? So and I had the luck to see great innovators in this industry, but today you're doing it from more let's call it like powerful media platform, right? So what do you think the biggest mistake founders make when they try to tell the world about what they are trying to do? Like what's the number one mistake they always do? Because climate tech is not like any other thing. Like, in traditional startup, I would say setup, like you have a problem and you focus on the problem and then you talk about the solution, you talk about the market size, blah blah blah, right? So when it comes to communicating a venture like this, what people should avoid doing as a mistake when communicating with the outside world?
You raise a very good point. The tech in general, I think, has a problem, and I've seen this working with a number of tech founders. Years ago, I was the managing director of an angel investor network based in Asheville, North Carolina, and seeing a lot of startups pitch, being around a bunch of startups, either mine or others I work for too. Tech companies actually, I think, have a problem, or tech startups, is because they talk about the tech, and that's fine for early adopters. But once you start getting beyond your early adopters, tech doesn't really move the needle in terms of what customers are looking for. Climate tech has two challenges. Founders talk about the tech, and founders talk about the climate. And customers may care about both of those things, but it's not what gets them to become a customer. The key is to talk about outcomes, talk about results. I'll give you an example. We talked to the CEO of a company recently, Sam Ramadori, the CEO of BrainBox AI. BrainBox AI got started about 5 or 6 years ago. It's an AI-powered solution that cuts the energy used by HVAC systems in big buildings by up to 25%, reduces carbon emissions in big buildings by up to 40%. That's massive, right? Because most of the energy that's going into a commercial building, whether it's a warehouse or an office, high rise, goes for heating and cooling. And so they've developed this incredible AI solution that can tell you with 96% accuracy who's going to be on an office floor in a certain space in 6 hours from now. Mm-hmm. So what that means is you can gradually either raise the temperature or lower the temperature. You don't have to spike it when everybody's in the space. You can actually start to use more energy when the grid has more renewables on the grid. You can use more energy when energy is cheaper, right? Because the price will fluctuate throughout the day. And so that's AI. Now, if you go to the owner of a building, you say, hey, I have this AI solution for your building. Let me tell you about my AI. No office manager, no plant facility manager, no CEO wakes up saying like, man, you know what I really need? I really need some more AI in my building. No, it's people, but people do think if I could cut my costs, if I could control my costs, if I could get more transparency into where either, machines may be in need of service, or if there's predictive maintenance capabilities where I could actually be proactive and take action to make sure my facility runs smoothly, and that's all powered by AI. Yeah, awesome. Let's talk about that. And so I think really the biggest communication opportunity and the biggest mistake is talking either about the tech and certainly talking about climate, right? Everybody loves to talk about climate. Once the tech's working and you're saving money or you're enabling all the business outcomes and results you want, then everyone's like, oh yeah, the tech, or the climate. Let me tell you about how much good we're doing for the climate. But no one buys because of that, at least if you're trying to get into the biggest markets and build the biggest companies on the planet.
Right. So I think this approach also, because you mentioned about the people who are like skeptics sometimes about climate change or like, the global warming. So decoupling the narrative from just a climate impact towards something which like cost saving, I don't know, like even maybe sometimes saving time, not only money, time, money. I think like it's resource perspective. I like this approach because, like now you remove the bias of someone who might not be buying your story of, like, yeah, there's global warming that we need to fight, or like, let's say the climate is changing and we need to do something about it. And of course, putting in the mix, and thank you for mentioning AI, because I know like, and I always tell people, just putting the word AI in your narrative, actually sometimes it might overcomplicate things rather than making it like look super cool, right? So or something like fancy. So all what you need is, you need, just as you mentioned, to tackle someone's problem, which is mainly if you are selling to a business, you need to see if you can reduce their cost, you can increase their revenue, decrease their risks, right? So this is what business people talk, and you need to just do that. And that's, yeah, in a good way when you can translate these ones into some numbers that you can show. And here where I think also, so what I understand from you, Josh, like it's, what works here is data, right? It's not like the emotions, it's not the cultural narratives that, especially when we talk to people who are skeptic. Like from your experience, like is it always the data, or maybe sometimes also we need to work on the emotions and maybe some narratives that we need to bring into the picture?
That's a terrific point, Mehmet. What triggers for me, so almost 2 decades ago in 2006, I started this media company called the Lazy Environmentalist, and which was a kind of if the shoe fits kind of media brand. It came about because my first employee, on her last day working for me with my modern design sustainable furniture company, her last day working for me out the door, she was like, "Hey, you're not my boss anymore, and I need to tell you something that's been on my mind for the 2 years I've been working for you. You're a terrible environmentalist. You're selling all this eco-friendly stuff made from recycled materials, what have you, but you're always in the shower. You're barely recycling. It was a startup we were working at in my apartment, and you're a giant hypocrite. And I don't understand you because it just doesn't make any sense to me." And so this was 2000, probably late 2004, 2005. So I wrote a blog entry, a little blog post on my site, called it The Lazy Environmentalist. I was like, look, here's the thing. I really care about the planet. I feel we're in this climate crisis. I'm trying to do my part, but I also really love long showers. I do my best staying in the shower. I know I'm using a lot of water. I know I'm using a lot of energy to heat that water. So what I would love is for the industry to come up with a fantastic low flow shower head that has great pressure, lets me enjoy my shower, but cut my impact, because I want to do right by the environment. I care about the environment, but I'm also set in my ways. I'm lazy and I need convenience. I'm a lazy environmentalist. But as luck had it, a internet radio producer read my blog. There just weren't that many blogs probably 2 decades ago. And eventually that made its way to Sirius Satellite Radio, where I had the show. And when we got to Sirius, I felt that, okay, the objective was to make sustainability appealing. Right? How are we going to do that? How are we going to talk about, overcome these hurdles of inconvenience or cost or perceptions? So that was the bar. So I went out and I found this guy, Plasma Boy, John Wayland, who was a drag car racer out in Portland, Oregon. And what was special about John was that he had taken a 1972 Datsun 1200, a tiny little car. He had borrowed a bunch of batteries from a forklift in his warehouse and shoved them in the back of this 1972 Datsun, souped it up, had a friend who was an engineer, went out to the Portland International Speedway and started blowing the doors off of muscle cars, Camaros, Corvettes. So we get him on the show. And the first thing he says is, Josh, you wouldn't believe it. The other day I was at the track, or the other night I was at the track, and I blew the doors off a Corvette. And I went up to the guy after and I said, how do you feel about the fact that I just kicked your butt with a car running on American-made energy? And I was like, wow, John, that's amazing. How'd you do it? He's like, how'd I do it? 800 pounds of torque, 0 to 60 in under 3 seconds. He's like, dude, this thing is a rocket ship. And you can see the videos online. It's like, it's amazing to see. There's a whole, he's kind of this legend now. And what was so interesting for our little environmental radio show on Sirius, this like little tucked away corner of the radio sphere, our phones lit up like they'd never, had never happened before. And the people calling in were not environmentalists. They were commercial truck drivers in their big rigs. They're rolling around the highways of America. And the conversation they were having with John was like, how do I get this for my pickup? How do I get this for my muscle car? How do I convert to electric? Because they loved the conversation around speed, power, patriotism, self-reliance, all of that registered for them. It wasn't about, wow, this is an environmental solution that I'm so in love with. And so that was a seminal moment for me. I mean, that really crystallized this view of, if you can frame what you're doing in terms of emotional appeal, really resonate with what people care most about on the most obvious merits of an electric car, right? Everybody knows you get in a Tesla or some other car and you press the accelerator, right? That's a different experience. And you can capture that emotional resonance. You can also move markets, and you can also, bring partners and customers and stakeholders to you.
Josh, just a question that came to my mind now. Is it something really hard to do, not only for climate tech across the board? Because, when you were describing this, immediately, I don't know why, what came to my mind is any startup founder, when they try and go in front of investors, so they follow a very, I would say, static workflow, so they try, of course, to put some storytelling, but I don't see much people put that effort to do something which you described just now. What do you think? People, they lack, I would say, kind of creativity to come up with something like this, or is it because someone just told them, hey, if you want to raise for your startup from a VC or an investor, you just need to follow this playbook and you will be fine. Now, what you just described is, talking even, and by the way, this is, you were talking about how to get people who are the truck drivers to adopt a technology, right? Which is, if you think about from outside, it's not possible, because these guys, they they're pedaling on the gas and so on. And yeah, they were excited about converting. Now, I'm thinking about this when I position this both from I would say, customer or prospect positioning perspective and funding perspective, because to me, you're doing the same thing. So either you're trying to sell your solution for someone who's gonna use it, or you're gonna sell your idea to someone who's gonna fund it. And in my eyes, both are the same. So why we don't see this across the board, Josh? And you've done fundraising multiple times. You've been investor yourself also as well.
It's a great question. I do think there are tenets that, prescriptions and frameworks that exist online that founders are trained in, that are more about, okay, what's the numbers? What's the TAM? What's the total addressable market? All of that is important. I have a couple of perspectives on this. Before I started Supercool, I co-founded a company called Planted with two incredible engineers from SpaceX. And we all assembled in North Carolina. And we had this, what seemed like a crazy idea. 4 years later, we're executing on it. Well, we had this idea that if we could identify something that grew faster than trees, right? Trees are known for their ability to pull carbon down from the atmosphere, right? That's how they grow. If we could find something that grew faster than trees, we didn't know what it would be. Hemp was our starting point, but that was just a starting point we were going to go explore. If we could do that and we could replace the reason why trees are cut down, at least in America, which is mostly for home building, right? For building materials. If we had something that could replace building materials, and then we could go build a factory that was electric powered, no smokestack. So we could turn whatever this was, like whatever, trees get turned into plywood, trees get turned into the material that's replaced plywood largely in home building, which is called oriented strand board, OSB. It's basically just like chipped, trees that are chipped down or lumber and then kind of compressed and glued together. It's cheaper, but still structural. If we could find a way to do that, build a factory that has no smokestack, then maybe we can figure out a way to pull carbon faster than trees carve from the atmosphere and turn it into materials that are useful, durable, to sequester that carbon away in new homes. So we start pitching that to investors. And there's a climate story here, but there's also this insanely captivating story of we're going to grow something that grows faster than trees. We're going to turn it into building materials and we're going to lock away in homes. And people are like, wait, what are you doing? How are you doing that? It's like, well, I got two guys from SpaceX, so we have an advantage. And of course, the SpaceX brand carries a lot of sway with investors. But we did talk about climate, but really we had this opportunity to kind of romance investors also just with what we were attempting to do, just on the technical challenge of what we're trying to do. Right? We're going to stand up our own. We're going to become a vertically integrated company. We're going to stand up our own agricultural supply chain. We're going to build a first of its kind production technology, never before built. And once we do all that, we're going to win on cost. We're going to win on performance, right? Quality, and we're going to win this market. Do you want it? Now, even still, if you go pitch 100 investors, 98 are going to say, no, good luck. Mm-hmm. That's just the nature of investing. But my point is, when we were pitching, we were telling story, right? We could talk about we could talk about market size, we could talk about our margins. We were telling story, but we were telling two stories. We were telling the story of this thing we wanted to put into the world, right? This new material that we were going to create, this new system. And we were telling a climate story, and then we were talking about the numbers. And that had a lot of resonance. I actually found that climate had the least amount of resonance in our ability to raise capital, even though investors were excited about it. At the same time, when we came out of that seed round, we raised a couple $1 million. We were fortunate. This was the end of 2021, so early 2022. We connected to the team from D.R. Horton. D.R. Horton's the largest home builder in America. 1 in every 7 homes in America is built by D.R. Horton. They are the behemoth. And they came to visit us in Durham, North Carolina, in their tiny little prototype shop, dirt cheap, not spending any money on it. And Wada and Nathan, the guys I started the company with, Christian, our first employee, had built this little press that could now build like 18 by 24 inch sheets. And we had moved away from hemp toward a grass that's similar to bamboo that we had found through the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. And so we built a press we figured out how to kind of strip the grass or get down to the fiber, retain the strength, press it with a small press. And we had a mixer so we could mix all this stuff. And we had this little kind of, assembly setup. The guys from D.R. Horton show up. They're major executives. We're sitting there pitching them, and they see these little machines working. 20 minutes later, we hand them a board. Now, this was during the recession when they couldn't get materials from the largest suppliers on the planet who they worked with. And they're looking at each other and like, we can't get materials. And these guys just figured this out in 20 minutes. And they're holding this warm board, right? And now it's small, but they're imagining building a house. And what crystallized for them, and what one of them said to me, because we've now partnered, and just to fast forward it, in 6 months ago, in the fall of 2024, we got an order from D.R. Horton for 10 million panels. That's about 90,000 single family homes worth of panels. We've come a long way very quickly. But one of the things their head of purchasing said, he's like, we care about cost. We care about supply. Of course, we're the biggest home builder basically on the planet. But I'm not happy about the fact that we're cutting down trees. That doesn't make me happy that we got to cut down all these trees to go build a house. That's not something I want to do. If you're giving me an alternative that fits all my other business objectives, I'm into this, right? And if this is going to solve other problems like moisture, which is a problem that the current solution has today, the boards they use today, I'm really into this. And I love the fact that we're not cutting down trees. So all of it does go together. And I do think that often we do hold back. If I could say one more thing on this, just last week I was in the New York area, and we were talking with a large investment fund that invests in energy efficiency, distributed energy, $2 billion plus fund, growth stage fund. Now they're going out to raise capital from their limited partners. And the partner of the fund who we were talking to was very clear. And he said, look, like, we of course need to go. We think this is an incredible business opportunity. Our LPs think this is a business opportunity, but all of our LPs, all of the big investors who put hundreds of million dollars into us also want to understand impact, right? Mm-hmm. They need to understand how is their money doing good. So we lean into that too. And so I think a lot of investors understand, but I think early stage startup founders are maybe a little bit too cautious. The challenge is to lean into your story, even if it's climate, in a way that is compelling and not moralizing and preachy, right? Because it's not like we should do this, we must do this, because that immediately turns most people off, investors included.
Yeah, just quick one here. How much do you think yourself working, in the media, I mean, and being a host right now, do you think this have impacted how you can come up with these stories? Like maybe an advice also for fellow founders in that space. Is there something they can do to learn about how to do this the right way?
Yeah, I have to think about it. How would you learn how to tell story better? Well,
it's hard.
No, Mehmet, it's a very good point. I mean, I mentioned early on in my career, after before I got into sustainability, I did this brief stint. I explored being a screenwriter. I was living in Los Angeles, and there's actually a book called Story, written by a very famous kind of screenwriting doctor, who kind of helps on a bunch of screenplays. I think he's written screenplays, Robert McKee. And Robert McKee, I think even at the time, he was probably in his 60s, maybe 70s, still had this 3-day, 10-hour-a-day seminar where he is on stage talking about story. And when you're writing screenplays, you have one page is about 1 minute of screen time, right? And you have to convey in a very succinct amount of space and language, emotion, a visual, right? You have to create you have to move a narrative with not a lot of words. That's really good training actually for telling stories. So Story by Robert McKee is a good resource. I think for founders, how do you get good at storytelling? I guess what comes to mind is to try to connect in a way and then practice it of what, again, I'm going to say like a Simon Sinek thing, or what's the why, right? Start with the why, right. But to try to understand, right, or try to practice telling others what's so important about this to you, right? Beyond we're going to make a ton of money, which is awesome, right? Like that is the point as well. But there's a lot of ways to go make a lot of money. So why is this the way? Right? And if you lean into that, your purpose, right? And it doesn't have to be my purpose, and it could be anything, right? But if like you lean into that emotion and you can convey with conviction why this is so important to you, especially for engineers, for tech founders who just don't necessarily aren't inclined to think that way, that's helpful. That's helpful to meet other investors who may not actually be engineers and hardcore finance tech. They may have more of that softer side that they're looking for. That I would really try to lean into that. What is that why? When I've heard a lot of startup founders pitch who are engineers, They want to tell me about the product. They don't even want to tell me about the business, right? They just want to tell me about the product. And it's like, oh, you're not building a product, right? You're building a business, right? Why are you building this larger business? And try to lean in there.
Absolutely. And, again, as you said, Josh, there's nothing wrong of saying, yeah, one of my goals, not purpose, is to get money. Nothing wrong with this. But there must be something that pushed you to go and, put all your time, effort, and, build a team just to do what you're doing. It cannot be money only. Of course, it's important. And I always tell people there's nothing wrong of saying, yeah, like, yeah, if I can build a wealth about from what I'm building, that's fine. But remember why you're doing it, because if you don't, and again, as you mentioned, it's like Simon Sinek thing, but it's real. It's actually real. And when I try to study, as much as I can in different sectors or verticals, I always find there's kind of a purpose behind why someone extremely succeeded in what they were doing versus people who were like, average, I would say, or maybe all the lights were on them at some stage and then all of a sudden they disappeared. Because, I'm always also a big believer that it's not about you do it, you succeed, and then you disappear, because this is also not good, right? So you need to appear always, and, to stay genuine to the original purpose that, pushed you to start what you're doing. Now, you mentioned something also interesting, Josh, about the investors and how even the LPs are, getting interested in this. Now, if I want to compare, I'm not, to be very frank with you, like I have very small knowledge about the climate tech space from investment perspective. I know like usually the investors are like less in that space because it's not like that one that you have the quick wins and you get the high IRR very fast, So this is something that can take some time. It's like even like usually the deep tech space is like that, but especially climate tech is something that takes time. So, but have you seen like people have more, willingness to be in that space just for the purpose of impact? Like if you compare it maybe to, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago, maybe even more, 20 years ago, are we seeing more people willing for the wait just for the sake of the impact that, this technology might leave?
No. I think
No.
that what investors are seeing, and it's moving in waves right now, but I think what investors are seeing is investors who want to put money into clean tech or climate tech are looking at global capital flows. In 2024, $2 trillion was invested into clean energy. And actually primarily solar and battery storage, but also wind, nuclear, you name it, across the board. 16% of that, which is still a huge number, $300 billion plus, was in the United States. Right? Mm-hmm. Now, 2025, we've got some policy headwinds, right? We have a new administration. They've got different priorities. Climate is not one of their priorities, especially in the way that it was in the Biden administration. Okay. That's a challenge. But America, again, was 16% of a $2 trillion number, right? That's China, that's Europe, that's elsewhere around the world. So investors who are looking, of course, you're looking short-term and long-term, but where you see the markets moving over time. And by the way, $1 trillion was invested in fossil fuels. So twice as much went into clean energy. Investors who are looking at that and looking at the global landscape see an inevitability. These are the biggest markets. This is the future. This is where this is going, right? That's not changing. The long-term trend's not changing. The challenges are, especially for take a company like Planted and for companies that are trying to introduce new technologies. And if they are, like you said, kind of hard tech, right? They don't necessarily have those 3 to 5 year exit window opportunities, and the margin structure is going to be, it's not software, right? It's not 80% plus software margins necessarily. Margins could still be great. You might be able to build a bigger moat, right? You might be able to build something that actually has greater competitive advantage once you get there. But it does take a different, I think, risk profile. And that's from an investor who's willing to say, I have a 10-year horizon, right? I really do have a 10-year. Years ago, when I was running this angel investor group, the prevailing wisdom, this was a decade ago, was like, oh yeah, it's 10 years to exit, right? If you're 7 to 10 years, somehow, sometimes people think, no, it's got that should really be 3 to 5 years. And if we're not there in 5 years, there's frustration. But I think that I think in the climate investment space, you do see huge funds. You do see more and more early stage investors who are committed. But you've also seen a lot that have left, right? Just as or they've changed their language. They said, hey, it's not climate tech, it's resilience, it's something else because now we have a new administration. My view is that if I were a startup founder I am a startup founder, if I'm building my next Planted and I'm looking at these VCs and which ones are changing their language and which ones are, I'm less inclined as a startup founder to want to go to the VC that's suddenly taken climate change off their homepage, whereas they were talking about it, just 6 months ago. Because I know I'm building something that's going to take 10 years. I don't want a VC who's going to maybe be outspoken, maybe not, maybe a little bit less committed to me, maybe not so willing to follow up in my next funding round if something changes just in the culture, even though the economic opportunity is still strong. Right? I'm looking for consistency. And I think that it is a challenging marketplace. There's pros and cons, people coming in, people exiting. As a startup founder, it's tricky to navigate. There's no just silver bullet on how you get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from my humble experience, again, I'm not the expert in that domain for sure, but what I, listen and I read some reports sometimes, especially that domain, clean tech or climate tech, whatever you want to call it. So now there are some outside of the US, and I'm speaking about at least here in the Middle East where I am living now. So there are some CVCs, corporate VCs who are trying to inject some money there. Even maybe some of the audience outside of the region, even in the region, they would be surprised that some of the oil and gas companies, they spawned out some VC arms just to go after how we can even make the fossil oil more clean, right? So we have a couple of examples here. Also, what I've seen is usually what you call them, the sovereign funds, right? So the big sovereign funds here, in the UAE or Saudi, in Norway, they try also sometimes to inject money there. But I spoke to a couple of founders in that space, not much, honestly. Usually fundraising is hard, but it's one of the hardest one to be in. I'm not saying this to scare people. If you are up to something, as you said, Josh, before, indeed, you will succeed, you will leave impact. One thing which, you cover also every company which is, if they are scaling currently. So scaling means, they have set up a proper go-to-market strategy. From your experience, Josh, what are some of the, I would say, things that are done differently from, you mentioned software, of course, when we talk software, SaaS, the GTM, there are a playbook, agree with it or not, but there's kind of, processes that we do. In climate tech, in clean tech, what's the GTM motive here? What define a good GTM strategy for these companies so they can scale?
There's probably a couple of things come to mind, but I think from my experience with Planted, I mentioned, aligning with DR Horton as kind of a strategic corporate for us. I think very often with first of its kind technology, finding kind of that corporate VC or that corporate partner who can also be that corporate partner on the commercialization side, who can help you through those early stages. You can do your pilots with DR Horton. For us with Planted, a couple of years ago, and we built our first 4-foot by 8-foot panel, right, structural, and we got it certified from a lab in Wisconsin. And we built a roof on a new single family home with DR Horton in Durham, North Carolina. And that was a huge proof point for us, right? This now is on it, right? So we get to go through these proof points with a corporate customer who then has enough confidence in us 3.5 years into this journey to place an order that transforms our business and gives the market confidence and does a whole host of things for us. Because if you're doing building materials, it applies in other industries as well. And you're building a home, there's a lot of risk there, right? It's a new material going into that home. What happens 3 years from now if the thing has a challenge, right? Well, we now have a corporate partner, a public company, who's saying, we're doing this. We are giving the validation here and the credibility, which enables Planted to go do other stuff. I've seen with a company we just spoke to called Cyclic Materials. Cyclic Materials is a Canadian company. They just opened, or they just announced their next scale factory will be in Arizona. They're the only company in the world that's figured out how to recycle rare earth magnets and then just pull the rare earth elements out of those magnets. Now, rare earth magnets are in every powerful electric motor on the planet. So that's an electric vehicle, that's an MRI machine, that's a hard disk drive in a data center. You don't get those things without rare earth magnets. That creates an opportunity for Cyclic Materials. When you look at their cap table, it's also it's a lot of their early customers. It's BMW, it's Jaguar, it's Microsoft, it's Amazon. They just had a very successful, in fact, they extended their Series B over the last, through April, to bring Amazon onto their cap table is going to be a big customer. So that corporate route for early customers is for early stage founders and businesses to get through that kind of the trough of despair, or whatever you want to call those early stages, is crucial. The other thing that I would say, we talked to this incredibly dynamic CEO, Ritu Narayan, who runs a climate tech unicorn, so $1.3 billion valuation last time they raised, which was over a year ago, called Zoom, Z-U-M. Zoom is fixing the school bus system in America. The experience a child has on a school bus today in America is the same experience that child's grandparents had last century. And what that means is that nobody knows where the school bus is before the child gets on, when the child gets on, right? It's paper, it's walkie-talkies, it's chalk it's ridiculous to think in the 21st century. Zoom comes in and says, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring some AI-enabled software. We're going to bring some tracking. You administrator, you're going to know where the school buses are. You parents, you're going to know where your child is. And parents, if your kid's not going to school today, just open the app and notify the app. And then we'll reroute the school bus so nobody has to wait and the school bus can go faster. And by the way, we're going to take all this data on where school bus routes and we're going to optimize it, because what we're really trying to get to is electrification, right? What we're really trying to do is electrify your school buses. So they did this with Oakland, California. They went to the city. This is the first district in a big city, to get to 100% electric vehicles for their school buses. Has huge benefits for the health of communities. No diesel going through this, right? For the students, it's less stressful. It's less noisy. The way they get there is through their software, they optimize the fleet and the routes so that Oakland, which had 136 school buses, only needed to buy 74 electric buses to actually deliver the same experience. That's how much efficiency they brought through their software, and now they go electric, right? But the way they sell in was they were very, very effective at getting these transportation administrators inside, effectively almost like government type like agencies, school districts, to change the RFP so it was more than just cost. And it was all these other benefits that Zoom could bring. So their go-to-market was really about conveying all the value that they could to get an RFP changed that they then could win, because it was almost more tailored to what they could deliver on and their competition couldn't. So there's no one way, but you have to be, if you bring that much value, and then you can actually, your go-to-market is like, we're going to bring so much value that you're actually going to change the RFP. And that's going to be our advantage because we're the only one who can meet it. Now, there's a lot of, you have to be very, very clever and very innovative and have a killer product, but that's also a huge unlock if you can get there.
Secure, I would say, strategic partnerships early before, So this will give you a real advantage, I would say. I've seen this also in health tech, I would say, especially if someone is trying to develop a new technology related to healthcare. So I've seen like the companies that can do these kind of partnerships, like strategic partnerships, finding early customers. I think this is very important. So they can go out and, they can scale. I'm not saying easy, but at least they would have an edge in the marketplace over like the other companies that might be out there trying to, or someone trying to build and just waiting for someone to come to them and say, hey, like, yeah, we just find about you. Can you help us? Like, this is usually is not happening a lot. Now, something I want to ask you, Josh, and this is related to you've doing this media thing. So, and I want to shed light a little bit. How much is important for founders today to build their personal branding also as well? We've seen a lot happening outside, especially on the social media. From your experience, is it like something good to have, or now it's like have to have thing?
I think you have to have it. And the reason why is that the markets are crowded, right? If we see this a lot in the built environment, right? Maybe it's around property tech or whatever you want to, however you want to label that, commercial tech, commercial real estate. And there's a lot of companies showing up with solutions that are similar, right? Maybe they're different, but they're similar. Well, how do you break through? How do you rise above that sea of same to actually get the opportunity? There's no question that there's an opportunity for a founder to raise their profile and therefore raise the profile of their company. And it's just human nature. And it goes back to me, like when I started my first company, this furniture company, which was called Vivavi, like Live Life, Viva V, or we call it Vivavi, right? And then that opportunity came to do a radio show because I just was this like lazy environmentalist and I wrote a blog about it. And someone was like, hey, let's start. Do you want to turn this into a radio show? My initial reason was like, yeah, because I have limited marketing budget and I want to get out there more. But my mental model was Richard Branson, right, who started Virgin. Right? And Richard Branson would do things like he would skydive, right? He would do crazy things to get attention because if he could get attention, he could then pivot that spotlight to his companies. And I still, right. And I think when you are resource constrained, as every startup is, and even if you have a lot of cash, you should still be really, really, careful about how you're spending your money. Using your ability to go grab that spotlight for your company, right? It shines on you, but it's not about you. It's about you, right? Pulling attention to your company. It's just massive. That hasn't changed. I feel like that's timeless. That's universal. Steve Jobs did the same thing. There's this lineage of CEOs you can look to who really understood how to leverage media and leverage their own personality to further their companies. It's so important and probably even more important today, like we said, because there's so much noise in the market.
Right. Yeah. So I think you mentioned Richard Branson and the Steve Jobs. Like, I think especially Richard Branson with what he did with the Virgin companies, I think, people might write books about, all the crazy stuff he did and, the different approaches he used. Like, yeah. So, and sometimes you need to be controversial. Like, you need to be the awkward guy. You need to just to grab the attention. And people sometimes, I think, they feel like, oh, if I do this, I would get like negative reviews, or like maybe people would have like bad impression about me. To me, I think like we should try. Like, it doesn't hurt, because what I've seen, today, like I've seen a lot of people who still say, no, I'm shy, I don't want to be, under the spots, and say, guys, like, listen, like, who gonna find about you if you don't show your face, right? And I say, like, look, someone else who might have something less worth than what you are building, someone who's not even 10% of what you're doing, but because they're doing, the media space rightly, so people, they know them, they don't know you, and you don't want to lose business because of this. So it's debatable still, people like, not taking it seriously, but I think this is moving forward, because you mentioned something fundamental, Josh. It's like it's a noisy world. Even Steve Jobs, like, think about in the 80s, he was saying it's a noisy job, like, or 90s. It's a noisy world, right? So you need to differentiate yourself. And I think, yeah, back to the storytelling, which we discussed early. Josh, as we're coming almost to end of this episode, just want to ask you, still I have two questions for you. If you want to, you know, decide to invest in a company today in the space which you do, what would be that crazy bold idea that would you would never say no to it?
Okay. Um, I'm still very, very interested in carbon removal. So pulling carbon from the atmosphere. But what I'm not interested in is pulling technologies that pull carbon from the atmosphere and then rely on carbon credits for their business model. In other words, that some company is going to buy this carbon credit that you create to offset their own carbon footprint. But it really, other than that, there is no utility. I don't get any
Mm-hmm.
actual. I'm not into that. Those to me, and there's lots of them are funded, billions of dollars flowing into it. Those still to me feel like glorified,
Fluff.
nonprofits, right? Like they're not but companies that figure out carbon removal and turn that into useful, durable products where there's real markets, that's very appealing to me. And so if you can show how carbon actually is the input or for what your product is going to be, I think there's potentially endless opportunity for that because carbon is everywhere in the atmosphere, right? There's just too much of it there. It's this abundant, could almost be, if you figure out a low cost way to get it, that could be an incredible business opportunity, right? Because it's really just like this waste material up in the atmosphere. And that solves a huge problem for climate. And I think you can still open very, very big markets. So those types of solutions are always appealing to me.
Right. Finally, like, any final advice you want to leave the audience today? Any call to action you want, anyone who listen or watch this episode today to take? And of course, where people can find out more about you and about Supercool.
So to the first part of that question, I will answer this again through my lens, thinking about climate and the momentum that exists today in the market. What I see that's very exciting when we're talking with CEOs of companies, we talk with CEOs of all demographics. A lot of the CEOs I mentioned, Ritu Narayan of Zoom, she started that company when she was 50. Sam Ramadori had a career as a private equity, he was in operations. He went and became the CEO of Brainbox AI. We've talked with a company called Rondo Energy that's figuring out how to do batteries for industry that are run on clean energy and bricks, right? Not lithium, right? He only figured out how to do that because he spent a whole career not figuring out how to actually shift energy and clean in industry toward in a clean way. So my point is, there's a prevailing view in our culture and society that it will be the younger generations that will fix climate. It will fall to them and they'll do it. That's actually false. But what I see is entrepreneurs, executives, leaders at all stages of life who have scaled solutions. And so the advice I would leave is this is an opportunity, depending on what your skill sets are. There is nothing holding anybody back from participating in what I believe is the greatest business opportunity on the planet, and that is the transition to a low carbon economy. So that's my advice. Get involved. Whatever your skill sets are, there is a place, and whatever your experience is, there is value in it. For Supercool, we're a podcast, we're a newsletter, our stuff shows up on YouTube, so it can all be found through Supercool. Our website is getsuper.cool. So that's a home for all of that as well. And then I am, as far as social, I'm primarily on LinkedIn. That's where I'm interacting the most. And so if any listener wants to find me and engage, that would be great. Happy to do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Josh. So for the audience, you don't need to go back a couple of seconds. I'm going to put the links for you in the show notes if you're listening on your favorite podcasting app or if you're watching on YouTube. You will find the links on the description. Um, One of the most engaging episodes I had recently, Josh. A lot of insights from you. I learned a lot myself, and I'm sure also the audience would learn a lot from you also as well. We shed light on a lot of topics which I think are beneficial, people, especially for people who are interested in the climate clean energy tech, and how they can go to market, how to talk to investors, what's going on in that space also as well. So I think you shed a lot of good insights and light on all these topics. So thank you very much again, George, for being here with me today. And this is how I add my episodes usually. This is for the audience. Guys, if you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you very much for passing by. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did so, give me a small favor, subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who comes again and again, thank you for coming back. I really appreciate your support, all your, you know, remarks, all your questions you ask me. But the big thank you is because of all what you have done for the podcast, especially this year, 2025. We achieved something, I'm really super grateful for all the audience. We are now trending or sitting in the top 200 Apple podcast in the entrepreneurship and business category in multiple countries at the same time. So I used to see it like once in a while in one country or two. So because of you, it's not because of me, this is happening. Also, we have been selected as one of the top 100 tech startup podcasts globally. Again, thank you so much for this. We've been selected as one of the top 40 business podcasts listened in Dubai. Again, this cannot happen by itself. So thank you for the audience. Thank you for your encouragement. Thank you for all, what you do for the CTO show. And what I promise you is always to keep it up, get awesome guests like Josh today, and meet you again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.